Sorry.
Jason's Taco Stories.
So true.
Good morning, guys. How are you? Good. Jeff is fine. Bill is well. And everybody else was silent. All right. Were you in the Guard or the Army? I'm just wondering. Well, my dad emailed me. We were on vacation as a family. We went down to visit Maureen's family down in Florida. And yesterday, my dad sent me this email. And it's a forwarded email that he got from something that he must subscribe to. And it's called this: Church Ladies with Typewriters. So just hang on. Don't judge me yet. But it was those things that they put in the bulletin that are like they mistyped, right? And so I thought two of them were very appropriate for today's conversation about financial freedom and how to love God with your money. So this is the first one. 8 new choir robes are currently needed due to the addition of several new members and to the deterioration of some older ones. Mike, I thought that you would really appreciate that. The second one is this: please place your donation in the envelope along with the deceased person you want remembered. Did you get that one?
Yeah.
It's a big envelope.
Or if they were cremated.
Or it could be dusty. Yes. Well, looking at Matthew 20, we're going to be looking at everything today through the lens of Matthew 25:21, and this is about the servant who did well with the investment that was given to him from the master, and it says, "You've done well, good and faithful servant." So how would it make you feel if you heard that from Jesus about your finances when you go to meet Jesus? Maybe you would say, if I met Jesus face to face right now, I'm not sure that he would say that. Or maybe he would for you. As you and I as we start to work on this and begin to refine this, I believe that Jesus could say this to each one of us as we look into and work on our financial lives. So how do we honor Jesus with our finances and in our financial lives? And we're going to be looking at that this morning. Before we do, my name is Pastor Scott Lessing. I'm the men's pastor here at Grace. And for the guys who are on YouTube, welcome. Please, what is it called when you hit that red square? Subscribe. It's a red rectangle, actually. Sorry. Hit the subscribe button, and you'll be able to join in the chat room. And if you do that, then you'll be able to throw in lots of questions or statements or say hi to the other guys that are on there that you know. The guys that are in the room, thank you for being here this morning as you braved the colder weather. It's supposed to snow tomorrow. Did you guys know that? That is terrible. So the guys on YouTube, stay in the house until Saturday, because the next couple days are going to be a little chilly. So why are we here? What do we do? Why are we here on Wednesdays? Wednesdays we follow the Sunday message. And as I was down in Florida, I was sharing with my wife's family about what we do on Wednesday mornings. And my wife's sister, who I would say is kind of maybe a sojourner right now, she is asking a lot of questions about God, which is really awesome. And she was like, gosh, I would love to be a part of something like that, where a lot of times if I hear us, because she has periodically gone to church, and she said, a lot of times I have no idea how to apply what I heard on Sunday to my life. And I thought, wow, that's exactly what we do here on Wednesday mornings. How can we practically apply what we hear on Sunday mornings to our lives throughout the week so we can continue to make Jesus number one in every area of our life? This week we're going to be talking about finances for the last time, the fifth and last time. And also, how can we go about making disciples who love Jesus, grow with others, and serve the world around them? And I think what a practical tool for us today as we talk about finances in even discipleship, because there are so many people in our lives who we know. I know I used to be one of these guys who I struggled with. I never had a budget until I was married. I never really did the budget thing until I got married, and I made some major mistakes. So how can we even walk alongside others who want to be discipled in this area specifically? But you guys may know some of the guys who are up here with me this morning. Jason Carter, Mike Rush, and are you glad to be back? Chris Wokel?
It's good to be back.
It's good to be back. So you're not glad to be back?
No.
Really?
It's good to be back. I didn't say I'm glad to be back.
Are you glad to be back?
Probably.
Okay. Were you in Florida?
I want to be. Does that count?
Whoa.
Oh, Jason just got me.
Hold up.
So I have white hair like everybody else down there.
You want to go on vacation?
No.
Okay, I'm
I don't
not
want to go on
understanding.
vacation.
This doesn't seem.
I'll go fishing.
Why don't you want to go on vacation?
Yeah, Scott, that's a whole thing. Vacations involve planning and money and family and communication and travel and all the things I don't like.
I hear people on the Guard go on vacation.
Yeah, the National Guard goes on vacation. You're right. Frequently.
We, just in case you're wondering what's up with the National Guard, we were just talking about how you can get your vaccinations down at CSU and how the National Guard are the ones running it down there. So that's why we've brought up the Guard a few times. Anyway, anything else for you guys this morning? Anything happened this week? I mean, I just came back from Florida, but on vacation.
Yeah, I had an interesting thing happen. Last Friday, I had an opportunity to speak about social justice issues, equal justice issues, things of that nature, to a Muslim community.
Really?
Which was really interesting. And so they had 3 speakers. Myself, I invited a law student who was Arab and Palestinian, also Muslim, who is interning. And then they had a speaker on behalf of the Muslim community speak. What I thought was most compelling about the entire thing, and it's just maybe my ethnocentrism sticking out.
Wait, what? Whoa, that's a big word. You're hurting my brain this morning. Can you tell me what that means
I
first?
follow that. It's how you view
Ethnocentrism?
yourself through the lens of your own culture, your own society.
How you see yourself?
So you then view the world that way. So it's kind of you see yourself as the top of the mountain, and then everything else in the world is viewed as a contrast to yourself.
Do you think that's a natural
So if I'm
behavior?
Polish,
Yeah.
I would view everybody else as a non-Polak. Right?
Yeah. So everything they did would be either weird or inferior to what you did.
I could agree with that.
And so what I thought was most compelling was how patriotic they were. Like at the end, they were celebrating like Abraham Lincoln, and they wanted to give quotes on Abraham Lincoln, and they were celebrating John F. Kennedy, and they wanted to take time to acknowledge the contributions of Martin Luther King, and they really were like excited to be in a free society. And maybe it was just me, but it just caught me off guard. I just did not expect at the end of this to have this like super pro-patriotic conversation. So it was very refreshing, it was eye-opening, it helped me kind of better understand how I need to clean the lens a little bit.
Can you expound on that part? Wow. We're going a totally different.
Sorry, I apologize.
Clean your own lens.
Yeah, so the filter, right? If I'm ethnocentric, then I'm seeing everything through the lens of a Christian African-American male in the United States. And so I need to clean the lens a bit to not prejudge other people in the area of patriotism, in the area of what they think about justice, their individual rights, the rights of others, and just try to find a way to identify those areas in my life. Because it became very apparent during that talk that I really had prejudged or hadn't even really given this community a shot at being exceptionally patriotic.
That's interesting.
I kind of relate that to my inability to give Marines a fair shake, because they weren't in the Army, right? Isn't that similar? Sorry, Ken. Hey, I wanted to share, remember November 15th, the windstorm we had and the tree that wiped out my electrical power stack and pulled a hole through my roof? I finally got a new roof Monday. Oh. And not only did they just fix that one area, they did the whole roof. They came out and got 3 samples of shingles and could never find a match, so they just had to do the whole roof. And I'm kind of happy about that. They still got to repair a couple of gutters and yet, but they took the old roof off and put the new one on all in one day. It's really good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of roofs, we dropped our podcast last week. Has nothing to do with roofs.
Did it fall on a roof?
It didn't, but
Okay.
I didn't know how to
Yeah, that's a
bridge
tough
that.
one,
It was
yeah.
a tough one to bridge.
Yeah.
But we haven't let Mike speak yet, but we did our podcast last week. It dropped on Friday, and you have to listen to it. It was really good. It's a 2-part series. The second one will be dropping this Friday, but the topic that we did this month was living in the tension and living in the tension of difficult conversations. And these two guys and Jason were with me on our podcast, and it was amazing preparing for our podcast. And we talk about it in the second one that'll drop this week. Just preparing for how do you live in the tension of difficult conversations. It was amazing how we couldn't even get through, we couldn't even prepare for the podcast because we all got into a disagreement. It was fascinating.
We were such poor examples of what we were trying to be.
But it was exactly what I think is happening today when you talk about anything that is a bit controversial. How, Scott, you and I were talking about it last week, how difficult it can be sometimes to even stay in the conversation because sometimes you can lose your mind or you see the people lose their mind and they leave. But how do we live in the tension? And so we give some practical advice on how to live in the tension, and we talk about it through what we went through as these 4 very different men talking, not even trying. We didn't even come in, what are we going to talk about? Somebody brought up one topic and it blew up, and it is fascinating. You have to listen to it. Pressing On is our podcast, but it was really, really good. But Mike, how about you? Anything?
I'm still catching up with, I'm trying to understand the new terminology. You dropped.
We dropped.
Okay. That means,
It was released.
I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, so think about, do you remember the demon drop?
He put
Yeah.
it on
Oh,
wax.
yeah.
as
Think
they
about
say.
that. We recorded it. Abby set it all up. She hit a button, and then it dropped on Friday. It went into the podcasting world.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay. I was real fortunate this week. There were 2 good days of weather, Saturday and, was it yesterday? Yesterday. Nice day, right? So I have granddaughters that run track for Berea Mid Park, and got to sit there and watch track outside. It's awesome.
How'd they do?
They did well.
Did they run?
Yes,
They're runners.
they're hurlers
Okay.
and long jumpers, high jumpers.
So they jumped also.
Yes,
They ran and they jumped.
they ran and they jumped.
Good.
So it's fun.
And I know your granddaughters, they're very fast.
They are.
I remember when I used to be able to beat them in a race. When they were very little, I could not do that today. Why is
Surprised
that
you could
funny
do
to
that
you?
then.
Well, probably the
My
last time you
mom-
tried to race them where they were in their cribs or something.
Yeah, they were like 5 or 6, but I beat them then. And I let them know
I
it.
think you're telling stories
They
now.
were running backwards though.
That's actually probably true. Very true. Well, this morning we're going to be talking about finances. Mike, will you open us up in prayer?
Sure. We thank you, Lord. We welcome you today into this room. We know you're with us all the time, Father. And we want to acknowledge that presence today. Bless our time together. Lord, inspire us with the words of your Holy Spirit. And lead our conversation, Father. Help us to grow closer together as men. And certainly closer, taking another step closer to you. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Mike. All right, so the survey that we did, I don't know if you guys filled out the survey. You were able to do it up until, Jonathan gave us a week to do that. And these are the results of the survey. The first question was, how much debt do you have? And 37% who filled it out was $0 to $1,000. And the second highest was $5,000 to $20,000. This does not include your home, but it would include like a home mortgage on your home, something like that. But it would include everything else, any other kind of debt that you have, cars, education, anything. So how much debt do you have? Were you guys surprised by this number that 37% was $0 to $1,000? Very low debt?
Yeah, I thought it would be higher.
Yeah. Oh, higher? The percentage?
I thought more people would be carrying more debt.
Right, I agree. I think that first section should be lower.
Sorry, fair statement, yes. I thought that the debt that they would carry would be higher, therefore
Roger.
the first section would be lower, correct.
Okay. All right, the next one was...
Wait, maybe we had a bunch of like 16, 17-year-olds do the survey.
Yeah, it may have been a technology issue.
Well,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
we got to run the numbers, do the analysis.
Yeah, I like it.
The second one was, where have you learned how to manage your money? And I was incredibly shocked / impressed that 21% of the people that responded were that they took a class in church to learn about their finances or how to grow in handling their finances. That shocked me, actually. Professional friend or a parent. What is sad to me is that only 6% said that they learned it from a class outside of a church, which that would include all of us when we went through high school or college, that we did not get any training on finances, which is scary. Very scary. Did this one, anything stick out to you guys on this one?
Well, I made the observation that it was the people in the church responding to this, and we've done Financial Peace University here in Grace for years and years and years and years. So that 21% doesn't surprise me.
Here at Grace.
Here at Grace.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that doesn't surprise me at all. But I didn't have any financial classes in high school or college, personal financial management classes.
So we could say that 51% of the people learned about finances through some sort of a discipleship process, actually.
Sure.
Right? So that's encouraging to me. What we're going to be talking about this morning, everything will be through this one lens. First, the lens that I talked about, two lenses actually. The first one is Matthew 25 that talks about being that God would say, well done, good and faithful servant. But the second lens, the primary lens actually that we should be looking at everything through, is Matthew 22, the greatest commandment, the great commandment. But when the Pharisees heard that he silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, go figure, it was a lawyer. One of them, a lawyer, asked Jesus a question, and the lawyer said, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You should love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the laws and the prophets." And that makes sense why the lawyer asked the question, because not because he was trying to trick him or anything, but because he was asking about the law. But he may have been trying to trick him too, which not all lawyers do. There's some good lawyers out there, Jason.
Yeah. The worst thing about a lawyer is that they have kids.
Why?
Your father's a lawyer, right?
I did grow up in a lawyer's home, yeah. But love God and love others. That's the greatest commandment. So if we look at everything that we're going to talk about today through that lens, it will really help us understand how we can manage our money and how we can love God with our money as we live through financial freedom. But how can we manage our money as we show love for God and love for others? Proverbs 6, if we turn to Proverbs 6, I love this. I love all the Proverbs because there's just so much, it's just so widespread, right? I mean, but this is great. Go to the ant, O sluggard. So we're sluggards. Go to the ant, O sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief officer or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. And then chapter 30, let's go to chapter 30. It continues. Verse 24, Proverbs 30:24. 4 things on earth are small, but they are exceedingly wise. So ants are wise. The ants are a people not strong, yet they provide their food in the summer. So the Bible is in favor of planning and saving. And Jonathan talked about this. What would it take to begin saving like the ants do? First is to do a budget. And if you've never done a budget, or if you struggle with staying on top of that, there's a lot of tools out there. There's also people who would love to talk to you, people here at Grace. There's a guy here in men's ministry who is offering to meet with you for free to help you get on a budget and plan and learn how to spend less and save more. But saving is God's way of preparing for more for the future. And that's really important. That's really what we're spending a lot of our time about. But for you guys, if you compared your financial planning to the way that the ants live, where would you find that you are most like ants as they gather, as they save, or as they have plenty? And we have different stages of life here too.
Thank you for that.
Do you want to tackle it first? I thought that you understood. So I would say a couple things, or at least one major thing, which is I have often lived, and sometimes today live, very similar to the ants in that I'm trying to save up, but the winter is a lot closer than I think it is a lot of times, right? It's always not as far off. Sometimes the winter is as soon as the next thing that I want becomes available. That's what I've stored up to grab. So I've had to learn to play the long game a lot more. And so to this end, I'm still trying to master this aspect of my life. My wife has been really instrumental in helping me do that. But I'm not a guy who likes an overwhelming amount of stuff. It's just not really been a part of my personality. But when I find something I like, I want the best of whatever that is. And so, you know, for me, whatever I've saved, whenever I've identified that thing that I want, it's just all going to go to it. And so figuring out how to play that longer game has been a part of my process.
So good, better, best, you always want to buy best.
Yeah, in fact, I think I deserve it, right? I convinced myself of that. I'm like, well, I've been saving, and this is the thing that I want, so I'm going to spend everything I have to make it the best.
Isn't that amazing how we can convince ourselves?
Absolutely.
It is fascinating to me how well we can do that. Mike?
I'm a gatherer. Fortunately, I've been blessed with a wife that knows finances, because I don't. So, as a matter of fact, when you had that stat up there about how you learned about finances, mainly from my wife. So, and I consider her a friend.
So you're a saver? Is that what you mean by gatherer?
We've gathered money over the years, and because she did a lot of that, I saw myself as the one providing, you know, going out and working, and then here's the money. Gather it up. And,
yeah. So you didn't spend. You weren't a spender.
No, I'm not a spender.
Chris, how about you?
Yeah, I think I'm close to Jason in this process. It seems that I have saved enough or gathered enough or put enough in stores for this winter, you know, whatever the next crisis is, like my wife's car dying again yesterday. But it doesn't seem that I have enough for the next winter. You know, so I put some away all the time. It gets used. I put some more away. It gets used. So I don't have a huge store ready for 5 winters, but I can get through the next winter. What's interesting, well, I'll talk about it later.
All right. The 7 winters, is that what you're going to talk about?
No, I'm going to talk about my $2 million of life insurance.
Well, I'll be your son. For me, I'm a spender. I've always, like, that's just, it's so natural for me just to spend before I think, right? And so I've had to really force myself. The fruit of the Spirit I've seen grow in the self-control in this area of my life, where my wife is amazing with finances and has helped me actually learn self-control as well, to the point that it's natural. It's become natural for me now. I'm not going to buy it at all, and I don't even desire it anymore. So, but I'm a good, better, best guy. Like if I'm going to spend it, I'm going to buy the best sweatshirt, right? If I'm going to spend $30 on a sweatshirt, I'd rather spend $45 on one that will last a year instead of 3 months, right? So I resonate with that.
Even if I only have $46, I've justified it because I'm like, it's the best sweatshirt, so it's time to get it, which is unfortunate and something I've had to learn. I will say, if I may, this verse, so our son's been coming. Our son's been coming to church with us lately, and we try to wrap up about the message, and we were talking about this message, and that verse stood out to him the most. He said, I've understood ants, I've understood, kind of how they work, but I've never really thought about how kind of an insect that doesn't really have a lot of, they don't think the way, they don't have a lot of consciousness, can still store it for the winter. And so we've been trying to teach him about the budget, and it was a great starting point for us to have the conversation, but also one that was convicting. Because the interesting thing about the word is, as you teach it, right, and you want to teach it transparently, that you then begin to have to talk about how you're not aligning with that. So it really generated a really good conversation for us.
So Jason just used a word, he and his son were rapping. And that makes me think of a story about my son when we were on vacation. I always try to use like cool words that our kids know. And there was a really nice restaurant that we would never be able to step foot into. And I used the word bougie. Have you ever heard this word bougie? So it means like super high end, super nice. And I said, Carter, look at that restaurant. That's a super bougie restaurant. He snapped his head. Dad, don't ever use that word. And I said, but I used it right, didn't I? He's like, yeah, but you're too old to use that word. It was fascinating. So when you said that you and your son were rapping, it made me think about that. That was funny. So we're going to talk about 6 points this morning. The first one is that we need to save for future needs, and that's really what we're reading about here in Proverbs with the ants, is that we need to save for those major purchases, the major emergencies. My wife and I right now are in the midst of reestablishing our budget because our health insurance has changed. We now have a $2,000 deductible on each person in our family. And so, you think about it, that's $8,000 that we could spend every year before our insurance even kicks in. Well, we were not budgeting that way 2 years ago before we got this insurance, right? So we have to really reestablish this. That's a lot of money to try to save every year, $8,000, right? But if you have a health savings account, you can do it pre-tax, so you can take some of that money. But where do you find $8,000 in your budget? So we're reestablishing that right now and trying to figure that out. One of the other things that Jonathan talked about in this saving for future needs is that he talked about debt and saving. And debt is getting something now by paying for it later, right? You take a loan for the car, you get the car now, but you're paying for it over time. Saving is getting something later by paying for it now. So you're putting your money away into a savings account, you're saving for when you may need that car in 5 or 6 or 10 years. And really watching the ants, watching how they save and store is really important. Now, I have to confess that in the middle of the sermon, as he kept talking about ants, all I could think about was the magnifying glass. That's how I watched ants growing up. And I thought, Scott, you are that is so sinful what you did. But that was before Jesus. But that's all I could think about. So anyway, don't do that with the ants. We want to watch the ants, not kill the ants. So that's I had to confess that. Sorry. Number 2, invest to bless others and avoid being a burden. In the house of the wise, this is Proverbs 21:20. In the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil, but a foolish man devours all he has. And in my Bible, at some point, I wrote self-control. This is the fruit of the spirit of self-control, right? Saving for things that are 5 years or less and investing for things that are 5 years or more is really the difference between saving and investing. How can what am I going to say? Anything that I'm going to spend in the next 5 years or purchase in the next 5 years, I'm saving, putting money away for. I invest in the stock market in my 401k or 503b. I do that for 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And there's lots of different opinions on how to invest, whether it's aggressive or moderate or not. And that's not for us to talk about this morning. You can get information on that for yourself, whatever stage of life you're in. But the big thing is the compounding interest that Jonathan talked about. And he talked about Jack versus Blake. And the compounding interest, when he started when he was like 19 or 20 or 21, and he started investing about $2,400 a year, the compounding interest was almost $1 million more than the other guy. What also gave me a lot of hope was the jump from 1.3 million to 2.5 million, how it grew from the age of about 60 to 67. In just 7 years, he gained almost $1 million, right? And so there's a lot to be said about in our later years how we are putting more, and the bigger the pot is, the greater you can double your money, right? So that's really the main thing about this compounding interest. But it's not about timing the market, or hitting it big at just the right time. It's really about time in the market, and that's what compounding interest is all about. But the one thing that really struck me was how this topic is invest to bless others and avoid being a burden. First, I want to talk about the foolish investing versus over saving. So foolish investing is that quick, the get rich quick schemes. And this is New Living Translation. I love this version on this verse alone because it's so appropriate for our time. But wealth from get rich quick schemes quickly disappear. Wealth from hard work grows over time. And that's that time in the market, putting your money in the market over time, and it grows, and that's wise. But he also says that over-saving, in Luke 12:21, over-saving is not healthy either. You can have too much and not know what to do with it. A person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. So we were in Florida this past week, and we were with my sister-in-law and brother-in-law, and they live in this golf course community down in Florida. There's a lot of them down there. This one is the homes are enormous, and there's a lot of wealthy people down there. And as Chris Meekins would say, they have bigger shrimp at their house than I have at my house, right? Or their barns are bigger than my barns are. They have a lot more in storage than what I have. And there's nothing wrong with having plenty. That's one thing that we have to remember is, I'm not going to judge the fact that they have a lot of money, and what they do with it. I'm not going to judge that. But if your relationship with Jesus is weak or non-existent, God cares more about your heart with him than he does about your wealth. And he wants us to store. So yes, we need to store, but we need to also have a relationship with the living God. And I wonder how many wealthy people know Jesus or are sojourners of God. And you think of the rich young ruler, right? The rich young ruler, he did everything to try to be in this relationship with God. And he went to Jesus and he said, what else do I have to do? And Jesus said, sell everything you have. Because it's really about your heart. Where is your heart? Is it more about your treasures and everything you've stored up? Or is it about God's kingdom and having this relationship with God? And he may just ask you to give more. So if you have $4 million saved up for your retirement, maybe you only need $2 million. And what do you do with the rest of it? I mean, we have 4 guys who would love for you to invest that in us. We would gladly take that.
That'd be great.
But what do you do with that? And so it's really more about your relationship with God. So the question is, what's the formula? What's the formula? Is it a heart thing? And as it says in Luke 12:21, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. So you're foolish not just to store up your wealth, but to store up your wealth but not have a relationship with God. That's foolish. So your treasure, your hope is in your worldly treasures instead of your godly treasures, right? And it's really all about a personal relationship with God, a personal conversation with God. But how can we, in Genesis 41, verses 33 through 36, let's read that so we can talk about that for a minute. This is, so we're talking about Pharaoh. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers of the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years, and let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. So storing up for the famine is not a bad thing, right? So what would you guys say, how can we apply that to our lives today while maintaining a relationship with God? How do you do that?
We're looking to the wise man.
Here's looking at you, Keith.
Well, it's similar to our previous discussion in that what we gather, what we harvest, we need to store up some. And that includes our finances. And not to become greedy and not harming our relationship with Christ. But there will be seasons of famine in our lives. We'll get the unexpected medical bill. We'll have cars that break down, need to be replaced. We need to provide a home for our families. So there are times when we need those resources, and the only way we're going to have them is if we've stored them up. But I wanted to say too that passage in Luke reminds me of the book of Exodus and a lot of God's story throughout the Old Testament, that He wants us to rely on Him, and that's why relying on our own success, relying on our own skills, relying on our money or our things, that's bad. He was trying to teach the Israelites in the desert for 40 years that I'm all you need. And so I just want to say that passage reminds me of that process or that thinking, that principle.
I've always looked at storing just so that you have enough, not so that you have plenty. And that's the stage that in our lives that we're at right now. We have enough, so we can focus on other things. And we choose to focus on our relationship with Christ and our relationship with our kids and our grandkids. And that's the stage of the season of life that I'm in right now. So we have enough.
Two things jumped out to me. First is one of my favorite verses in Proverbs 25:28. A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. I think about that verse a lot when I think about everything when it comes to being a reckless person, being a reckless human, kind of what the devastation it leaves in your life. And financial planning to me is a part of that you need to be self-controlled, because you leave yourself defenseless when you're not self-controlled. Probably as I'm talking, I think about any good fighter, right? Any good fighter is going to tell you that you have to manage that fight well, because if you're reckless and if you have poor timing, the other person is going to take complete advantage of you. So I just think about that. I also think that in the context of saving, that Jesus would always give very practical responses, almost to the point of like, take inventory of the world you live in, and then understand how to navigate that world while still understanding that you have a calling. And that's what I really liked about this message from Jonathan, was he said things like, you should try to store up 6 months, right? You should have 6 months of your pay stored up for a rainy day or for when something bad happens. And that's a great principle. Is that found directly in the Word? No, but I think it's analyzing the world we live in and kind of the time it might take someone and the resources you would need to handle an emergency, right? If we get an expensive car and you know what the worst case scenario is for that car, or even an inexpensive car, do you have worst case scenario saved? so that it will not completely detriment your life and your lifestyle. And so I just think that there's wisdom that goes into that, and you have to be self-controlled in order to stand against the turmoil that will come in life.
Well, number 3 is provide for those who invested in you. And this kind of is carrying over, not only investing to bless others, avoid being a burden to others, but number 3 is provide for those who invested in you. And this is challenging. I think this is a challenge. How do you do this well? Each situation is different, but this is what the scripture says in 1 Timothy 5. Honor widows who are truly widows. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household, and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. And then go to verse 8. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. That is wow, right? So taking care of our family members, God calls us, it's an act of godliness. He calls us to do that. So we need to take care of our parents and our grandparents. My dad has said to me many times that he doesn't want to be a burden on my wife and I. And obviously that's an amazing place for him to be. But at the same time, we have found it to be a joy to be able to take care of my parents. They don't need a lot of help right now physically, but we go down and help them with like their house. Like they live on very steep land, and they just can't take care of it anymore like they used to. So we go down and help them multiple times a year, do stuff like that. But there's going to be a season where my parents may need to come into our home for a period of time, and that's where my dad says, I don't want to be a burden. Like we think that we can be able to, even if we go to a nursing home, that we'll be able to do it with Medicare and some of their savings. So I strive to be like that, like to not want to be a burden, but at the same time I want to be able to take care of my dad if we need to. And that Mo and I have said that her mom had this surgery a few years ago. She had esophageal cancer, and they had to remove her esophagus, and she had to live without an esophagus for 10 weeks. Can you imagine that? But during that time where she didn't have an esophagus, she stayed with us. And I was the lucky one that had to clean out her esophagus every day. It was absolutely disgusting, but it was an amazing time to be able to take care of her mom when she's taken care of us for so many years, right? And it was only 10 weeks. That is a long time, but at the same time, it's not that big. Some people have parents stay with them until end of life, right? So to be able to take care of your family in times of need is really important, and God calls us to do that. So that's important for us to do. I do want to talk about this just for a second. It was in the notes, but Jonathan did not mention it. I want to make sure that we mention it today, that we do have an emergency relief fund. It's called ERF. And this is for people, if you don't have family to help you, to take care of you, there's an emergency relief fund that people in our church give to on a regular basis, and it is designed to help you if you are in a time of need financially. So if you are there, you can call the church, you can just email me, and I can email you the information on how to apply to get that emergency relief fund to help you if you are in a time of need. So please, we want to be able to help you. People at Grace have given to that, specifically to help people who are in need and who don't have family to help them. The fourth thing is to protect your family through insurance. Now, you want to talk about this.
Well, not in great length. I'm blessed in that I'm in a position, having spent 21 years on active duty in the Army and retired. And, I have survivor benefit plans. I've got Veterans Group life insurance. And now that I work with the Army as a civilian, I have life insurance through them. So my wife would be far better off financially if I weren't here. Her monthly income would be much greater.
Careful.
Would be much greater if I. And so there's a lot of places where I can improve, and I intend to. but this is one that my family set. And I'm blessed in that way.
I was convicted because my family would probably be far better off if I wasn't here today, not like if I died. So my wife would probably be in a much better situation, not having to deal with my crazy. But to this, I think that I'm reminded of this concept of are we supposed to, is communal living, right? Is living in community with your family, especially in times of need, is that an ideology that we have lost sight of as a society? That we can live, multiple generations together, pooling our resources to help the family. And I think that there's just this idea that we have that at the end of the day, our parents, they raised us, we became independent, and so now we've kind of severed that relationship, right? They need to be independent, and then we're going to try to be independent. And I just think that we sometimes, not in every situation, may not be doing the work of God by trying to force someone to be in this independent, self-reliant situation that they really can't manage, when we can try to find a way to live in community.
That's good.
I like that. I've thought about that before too. My mom and stepdad live in Washington State. I joined the Army, moved away, and I never went back. So I've thought about that. How do I take care of my mom? How do I honor her? How do I take care of her? Fortunately, I have a little brother that lives there, so I count a lot on him. But if something happened to him, I would be in a tough spot.
Yeah, my mother, sorry, we're confessing here. My mother's in Texas. And to your point, I have 2 siblings, 3 actually, that are there that I rely upon to because that's a burden of mine. Is, if anything would happen to my mom while I'm not there. My dad, sorry, he's alive too, right? Terrible. My dad is there. If anything would happen to my dad while I'm here that I couldn't respond immediately, I have some comfort in knowing that I have siblings there, but it's a burden I carry in feeling like I have an obligation to them. And this verse to me resonated with me on Sunday.
Well, in community, talking about that, my brother lives in San Francisco, and he's been part of that whole tech movement for many, many years, and he and his wife have done very well. And we've come up with this agreement that, I live here physically with mom and dad, and I'm going to take care of them, and, on the physical side, and if there's anything that they need financially, that Dave has said, hey, let me take care of that, you take care of the physical, and that's that community, that we've come to say, okay, that's a good working agreement, right? That we can do that together.
Yeah, could he add my family to the financial aspect of that list? Just throwing it out.
Yes. But insurance, it safeguards you from losses, but also it helps with your family when something happens to us. The 5th thing is do the most good that you can as an employer. I want us to sit on this one for a little bit, because this one I think is really intriguing. When Jonathan brought this up, he kind of flew through this. We're going to sit on it because you don't want to.
Scott's being taken care of by Pastor Jonathan.
Maybe. But it says, so do the most good that you can as an employer, owner, manager, or overseer. And Proverbs 3:27 says this: do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to act. There's so much in that verse. Oh my goodness, there's so much in that verse. But where Jonathan went with this was, as business leaders, they can reflect the heart of Jesus. As owners of companies, or even just as a manager, if you manage people, you can reflect the heart of Jesus. But in James 5, let's turn to James 5, because in James 5, it talks about judgment, actually. All right, James 5, verses 1 through 6. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you. and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. There's so much in that. So how do we honor those who work hard, and how do we take care of them? My question, I'm going to let you guys be controversial, okay? Does this still happen today? Do we not pay people a fair wage? Do the rich get richer and the poor stay the same, or moderately, the moderates stay the same and they will never have wealth? Does this happen today, and how can we avoid this? Mike, I'm gonna let Mike talk first.
I got a smile about this because my wife and I ran a nonprofit, and when you run a nonprofit and you're paying your employees, they're not the highest paid people around, especially in the human services field. So for a number of years, we ended up we froze salaries because it was a way for us to budget our money properly and to make sure we had enough, because we didn't know what kind of year the coming year was going to be nonprofit-wise. So, but at the end of the year, we always gave them a raise that was comparable to giving them a higher salary. So it kind of helped us keep the bottom line throughout the year, from year to year, but then we still ended up rewarding them. And they probably didn't like it that way, but that was the way that we ran things that helped the agency out. And then it still helped them out too. So some years they got big raises. In other years, they still got, not a raise, but they got a big bonus at the end of the year. And it was around Christmas time. And that was helpful. And then other years they didn't get as much because we didn't bring in as much. So that's my answer to that.
You said controversy, I guess, so
Yeah.
Lean on me, right? So I think there are a lot of conversations happening now about this issue, right? I think that without taking a position on it, what we've seen is that the top 1 to 10% of our society, their wealth has continued to increase. And then the vast majority of individuals in our society, at least in America, their wealth has stayed pretty flat. Right? They've not been able to make it into some of these higher income brackets. What does that mean? How do we address that? I think that we also have to understand that we're capitalist and that we live in a capitalist society, but we're also Christians. And so how do we as Christians try to address and identify the needs of the widow, the poor, the disenfranchised, because that's our call as Christians in a capitalist society. I look to Joseph for guidance, right? Joseph lived in a society that wasn't capitalist. We don't know what their economic system was entirely in Egypt, but he still brought his faith to bear in how he managed the money and how he addressed the needs of those who had it. I think in our society, I think the church is, and in people who have the fundamentals that we learn in church, have to feel empowered enough in our society to use the abundance that we have to help those who do not. I think that if we believe in capitalism, then we believe in economies of scale. We believe that there's going to be a very, very wealthy top, and there's going to be a disadvantaged bottom, or capitalism doesn't work. Right? And so I think the church is a great institution, nonprofits are great institutions to bridge that gap. And I'm not talking about, right, I'm not suggesting, because I've had this conversation so many times, this kind of equal outcomes for all, right? Jesus would suggest that that's not even possible when he said the poor will and will always be, but he wasn't acknowledging that we should be apathetic to the poor. He was helping us understand that societies will always create wealth and they will always have poor people, and we should be in a position to help those who do not have it when we have it. So that would be my position. Is this happening today? Absolutely. Are Christians being caught up in wealth-driven ideologies? Absolutely. It's ironic. So I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine, and then I'll yield the floor, and we were talking about the kind of the pros and cons of the prosperity gospel. And we were, identifying pastors and listening to messages, and we were in a tug of war because he really enjoys a pastor who I would call a prosperity preacher. And we just had an hour and a half long impromptu conversation about this. And so I think these are conversations we need to have so that we as Christians can find a position and exercise Christianity in the world.
So what you're saying is, if I heard you right, that there are people who've been blessed to have more money than others.
Without question.
And that God's called us to help those who are in need and do not have the wealth that others might have.
Absolutely. And that all wealth isn't how do I say this the right way? Some wealth is an ill-gotten gain, right? And so I don't think that we want to look at all wealth as if it's the result of God validating someone's behavior or character. But we as Christians kind of, regardless of that, need to be in a position where if we have the ability to redistribute, if we have the ability to impact someone's life with wealth that we have access to, we should really be evaluating that through the lens of Christ.
That's good. And there's a lot of ways we can do that. There are a lot of organizations that we can share with you if you would like to be a part of that. But even here at Grace Church, like I was talking about, the ERF, the Emergency Relief Fund, that's a way that we can do that. And I will say this, that it has really encouraged me during this time of COVID. That amount of money has grown exponentially because people who have wealth have given to the ERF because there have been so many people, especially early on in COVID, so many people were laid off. So many people they took less pay so they could keep their jobs, or maybe they were in the food industry or whatever industry they were in, and they lost their job or took less pay. And so a lot of people gave in amazing ways. It brought tears to my eyes to see how people gave during this time of COVID for that.
Can I just say, sorry, I just think also as Christians, I hear a lot of conversation where we want to judge people so harshly for being desperate during the pandemic. And I would just remind us that, not everybody is aligning with financial principles perfectly, right? We all have sinned, we all fall short, so we have to approach it with grace. But the second thing is we're seeing major corporations, right? $1 and billion-dollar corporations go through bankruptcies and reorganizations and things of that nature. You never know how this shutdown kind of directly impacted someone's ability to access resources and to access a job. And so I just say we need to be very sensitive, especially in how we're communicating to people that are in these situations.
Yeah, and the part I thought was going to be a little more controversial, which these guys didn't jump into at all, so I'll take the heat, is, now this is going to be controversial. So thank you for letting me take this on.
You're welcome.
You're the pastor.
I know. Should we pay people more than what, the common pay is for whatever the job is? If you're an owner, should you pay them more than that? Let's say, and I'm not even talking minimum wage, but you could go there too, and then all of a sudden Scott Lessing's become a left liberal just because I've talked about it. But I think it's an important.
Is there something wrong with left liberals?
There aren't, but I've been accused of it many times. But I think it's something that we need to be able to have a conversation about and say, is there anything wrong with paying people more than what minimum wage is? Is it fair? Is it a fair wage for them? For the job that they're doing? I went and visited, do you guys remember last year when we got all those free orchids and all the free, what were those called? Neil, were those lilies that we gave out, do you remember? Easter lilies? That company was Green Circle Growers, and they said, hey, we want you to come out and see our facility. It's 120 acres, all under greenhouse. It was crazy. They took me through a tour of everything. They produce like 9 million orchids, more than any other producer in the U.S. And it was just really cool to see their growth process. There were so many spiritual components there. It was amazing. But they pay all of their workers 20% more than any other greenhouse in the country. Why? Because their owners are Christians. And they believe that the guys at the top don't need to make as much money because they are already millionaires. And they've said, we want to bless those who are blessing those who receive the flowers. So the guys like on the front lines, if you will, who are doing the physical labor, they pay them 20% more than any other greenhouse. That's mind-boggling to me. And they have this whole system, this legal system with the migrant workers in Mexico, where they legally come up to the U.S., they come into Oberlin, they work for 10 months at their plant at the same pay as every other worker in the building, and then they go back down to Mexico for 2 months to spend time with their family, and then they come back up and work for 10 months. I forget that they have a special name for that. It's all done legally through the government, but it is fascinating, but they pay them the same pay as every other worker in the building, which is not true for a lot of companies here in the U.S. So I think there's ways we can do it, and these guys are Christian owners, and they are being blessed like crazy financially. So how can we be, not just financially, but how can we be good employers, managers, owners as well? But the last one is give to be like Jesus and see his promises fulfilled. In 2 Corinthians 9, verses 6 and 7, it says this: remember this, a farmer who plants only a few seeds will get a small crop, but the one who plants generously will get a generous crop. You must each decide in your heart how much to give. This is what I've learned over the years, is that even when I do discipleship, he's the author of multiplication. I'm just the worker. I'm there just to facilitate. God is the one who grows these guys, in the discipleship, the DMD groups that we have. And it's been fascinating to watch that, by the way. But if you want great impact, the scripture says plant a large field. Don't just plant a few seeds. Plant a large field. Not only giving financially above and beyond, more than 10%, but give of your time as well. Your time can be considered money as well, right? Give of your time, disciple others. Give to be like Jesus and see that his promises will be fulfilled when we do so. Guys, we are up across the hour. It's 8:03, so we're going to end here. I do want to just challenge us, that paradox of generosity, to be more generous today than we were tomorrow. That's that number one, making Jesus number one in every area of our life. How do we make him number one in this area of our life? First of all, get a budget, talk with someone else about it. Also, look at our finances. How can we be more generous than we are today? How can we, not just financially, but even with our time? How can we give more of our time? Building hope in the city, DMD groups here. There's a lot of things that we can do with our time to invest in the kingdom of God. So more people grow in their faith, but also so that more people know Jesus. What are we doing outside the walls of the church to share the gospel with others, to rub shoulders with people who don't know Jesus? How can we do that more effectively? And also, how can we give more impactfully? So what we're going to do right now, guys online, I'll put the Zoom room information in there in just a minute. But guys at our tables, you guys can go ahead and start your conversations. And then guys online, we'll start in just a few minutes.
James, the chicken hearted, his last comment is hilarious. He said, I hope the ERF is on your interest. Come on. That's a great
Electro radio
frequency.
What is that? What's ERF?
Emergency relief.
Oh,
Obviously, check that out.
listen, I'm an electronics, science, physics, math.
Yeah. Still thinking about the great things his wife's going to do when he dies. Right? Yeah, she's gonna.
With his money.
You'll have this big muscle.
No, not even. She'll burn me and dump me in the woods.
Yeah, that's my wife, man. I only have about 10 minutes and I have to leave.
Go ahead, man. If you need, if it'd be better for you to run now, that's fine too.
You kicking me out? Okay, I'll take
No,
it.
I'm just giving you options.
Yeah, it felt good. It felt good.
You know, I mean, it's like how you want to invest. You always need options, Jason.
Yeah, I've been kicked out of better places than this one.
Ecclesiastes 11:2 says diversify. Diversify.
I don't even know what that means.
Diversify?
Yeah.
Means split up. Be diverse.
Yes, have multiple.
Put your investments in different pots.
I put them here local.
You can diversify financially.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
I trust them to do things.
Use your microphone.
No.
So this
Oh,
guy,
wait, this microphone? This microphone.
I want you to be wary of this name.
Oh, yeah. He's trying to buy.
Do you know that guy? He was asking about this so-called man, and he's like, I'm such a fan of this channel. So he might be maybe. Hey fellas, did you write those index cards, Don? You're not going to have that in front of you while you're driving.
The cars have been good for a year. So
You're going to wreck. You'll be playing with the screen on your phone if you're off the road.
We just gotta figure out where. Oh, the Vatican is good. Vatican. Oh, by us? The district's good. There's a whole lot of tacos. It's kind of low, bro.
Mark, you're being funny.
There you got that. You just got that.
I wish.
Thanks, Jason.
Big crowd today. Hey, you have some updates to
These are all updates?
Yeah.
Verlin, I almost didn't recognize you without the beard, bro. Verlin. Okay. I like it. That was just funny. I'm sorry. It was just funny.
Even when you don't want them to.
Well, the first question I'm going to ask you guys is, we didn't even talk about this, but what kind of giver are you? Are you a periodic? Are you a percentage? Or are you a progressive, meaning more than 10%?
Good question. Answer.
That's good, Mike. Hey, Jim, you're muted, just so you know. There you go.
We were. So I think there should be a fourth category. You know, between periodic, which is occasional when the need tugs on your heart, a percentage giver and progressive giver, in my lack of discipline, there are times that I don't tithe, but I should, but I give other places. And times that I do tithe and I give more to other places. So I think there should be like an undisciplined category. You know, one that needs to get your act together category. That's probably where I belong sometimes.
Same thing.
Yeah, it's good.
Somebody's help. Judge on that statement.
Good.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I agree with that, Jim.
Yeah.
Yeah, Scripture's clear about giving off the top, right? The first fruits, if you will. And that would be what a lot of evangelical Christians would say is 10%, is giving off the top, the first fruits. And then anything after that would put you into the category on here as progressive giver, or as Jim said, giving of your offerings, which would be above and beyond your tithe. Yeah.
We have a lady that comes here to church and she knows me well. I'm on the security team, you guys know, but she's special needs, and every other weekend she asks me for coffee money. So I'm kind of like built in this like $10 a month for her and her coffee.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, not really, but I do it because I can't tell her no.
I know what. I know Maureen and I, what we do for that offering, for the, as we have become progressive givers, is my wife loves to help people in need. If they're going through, like, if they have off the charts medical bills, she'll want to give that way. The other thing that my wife loves to do is whenever somebody has surgery or anything like that, and we know them, she will always make a meal for them. And I mean, I bet she does probably 30 or 40 of those a year, So those add up, right? And not that I'm bragging. I'm just saying, like, that's another way that my wife just loves to use her gift of cooking, and she's super high in hospitality, and so you can be creative in the way that you do it, and not just put more money in the coffers, right? It's ways that you can almost use your giftings or skill sets. We have a lot of guys here who are gifted and they have skills as handymen, if you will, and they use their time and even some of their money to buy the stuff that's needed to fix somebody's pipe, or to
Build a ramp into
Yeah.
the front door.
yeah. So it can be using your time, like if you have billable hours, if you will, that you can use your time that way as well.
I know a family that has a large boat, and they spend their summer taking families and friends just out onto the lakes or whatever, just to share what they have to bless somebody else. And they think of it that way.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Peter. If you guys didn't see in the chat, Peter put an app in there that may be helpful. Good. Hey guys, so in Genesis 41, Joseph is instructed to start taking a fifth of everything that they gather in Egypt and store it away for the coming famine. How can we apply that wisdom in our own lives?
Well, one thing that I love now, Jim, is that you've revealed who you are on the chat room. James the Chicken Hearted. Now I know who you are. Now I know.
The secret's out.
Yeah. I've been there. I've heard those chickens, Jim.
So guys, hopefully you're looking at the notes as well, because this is a long, complicated question. But there's a sweet spot between having enough so you're not a burden, but not so much that you have more than what you need. How do we define that sweet spot, and which of these 7 things do you need to most focus on? Save for future needs, invest to bless others, provide for those who invested in you, protect your family through insurance, do the most good you can, give to be like Jesus and see his promises, or seek help. So those are the 6 things we talked. Which of those jump out at you?
Don't feel the guilt of your nieces and nephews. I mean, if you can help them in some way.
Save for future needs, invest to bless others, provide for those who invested in you, protect your family through insurance, do the most good you can, and give to be like Jesus, or seek help. Well, I think if I were going to answer this, I think I need more money in savings. You know, I know I've got to replace tires. Yeah, see, and that doesn't happen annually, so it's hard to budget for, but we do. But there are things out there. I got a 17-year-old daughter who's going to college next year, and I'm sure she's going to need some help. So I wish I had more in savings. So I would have to say save for future needs. Just being transparent. Right. And not just the new car, but the best new car. like Jason and I were talking about. And it's interesting you bring that up, Mark, because last night in my house, we had this conversation. My oldest daughter has her spring break next week, and she says that she needs to go to the beach.
Well,
And I'm like, no, honey, that's not a need, that's a want.
first time,
Yeah, so
literally my life that I've had
I will. The flats.
to address some issues.
But I can meet,
that from the time I was 20 up to now, I've always been too
She can
busy
meet God there on the beach, though.
you know, sure, she can meet God in her
things in
bedroom
my
too.
life that need to be addressed, such as
On the back patio while she's power washing the concrete.
I was too busy supporting my mother and my brother. I was too busy supporting my mother, my brother, and his wife. I was too busy putting out the financial disaster issue that things that I needed in my own life, spiritually, sociologically, and it's the first time now I need to get rid of and deal with demons and ghosts that I've had the last 4 weeks. So that's pretty much what I'm doing. Last with the first step in this, which is that when it comes to me, I'm fairly cheap. No, not cheap. I'm not cheap with other people, I'm cheap with myself. And unemployment, which has been extended because one of the other things I have to deal with is trying to figure out what kind of job I want, what I want to go into. That type of thing. Also, that my personality has changed since I was last in the corporate world. And I don't know if I can go back to that or I can to the city skyscraper. There are stipulations I have. I will not do that work on mask mandates. I will not say that it's for mask on I refuse to do.
Yep.
Another is that I want a job, get up and get dressed and go somewhere. I'm not going to sit for those. Absolutely. That's not even I refuse to.
All right, guys, we're going to wrap up. As we do, I want to point us to something different than what we've been talking about. I want to point us forward here and talk just for a minute about Holy Week. In your notes, you'll see that I gave you 4 verses, and I'm going to say them out loud for the guys online in case you guys don't have the notes in front of you. You guys can write these down, but it's really, this week is really a great time to reflect on what is Easter really. It's not about